Hi, I was recently able to add views integration into the CIS connector module, and I wanted to show just quickly how you do that because it took me a while to figure out. So first thing you want to do is in your module file, you want to tell views that you're using views. So scroll all the way to the bottom here and you'll see I have this CIS connector views API. Really, this is all you need to get started. This tells views, hey, I'm using views in some way. Then it's going to start to look for a .views.inc file. There's a bunch of different hooks you can put in there, but for the purpose of this, I'm writing a plugin for views. You're going to want to use hook views plugins. I realize most people are not going to use CIS connector. It's mostly to bind together a series of distributions in Drupal through the REST WS module. So very specific, but I think it's a good use case in general for how you connect things together and use a views plugin. Then what I'm doing is I'm using views post build. So I'm actually looking at the type of information that's here. This gets handled right after it's built everything, just before it actually makes the query and builds the system, builds a result, sorry, for views. So you can see here I'm saying, in this case, I'm using a project called Views XML Backend. If it's an XML-based request, and we've got this connector information from CIS, then I want you to alter the way the query is presented. Pretty basic on that end. What you want to do to get settings into a view. So let's look at what this view ends up doing. This is information that it doesn't actually live in this web address. So this lives on a different service in the course information system rig I'm building. And so what you do when you have this turned on is you get this nice little CIS connector options set here. So if you wanted to add options specific to your views you're creating and data that you may manipulate, this is how you do that. So how did I get this CIS connector here? Well, you define a views plugin. Display extenders are the type of plugin, if you will, that shows up in advanced and under other. So I'd recommend using that just if you want other settings, essentially. Then you give it a path to your module. You give it a name for what it should call that bucket there. So that's the CIS connector thing you see right there for title. And then you give it a handler. So the handler has to match the name of this other file. So you have CIS connector views plugin display extender.inc. Basically, you just take off the .inc and put that here. What that file ends up looking like is you have to extend the namespace of a type of views plugin. So in this case, I have the default views plugin display extender. It's the name of it. This took a while to figure out because views is just, there's a lot going on with views. But so I have class and then the name of my display extender. So this is going to be my specific little settings bucket, if you will. I don't think you need to add signature there. I just copied that from the original. So you use option definition and an option definition alter. I had to use both of them. I'm not sure why. But so these are your default settings. So for me, there's no bucket and instance is another setting. It's a boolean. So that defaults to true. So this is what happens when someone just submits it without filling out those fields. Next, you have option form. So in this case, I want to make sure that when it's page CIS connector, which is that views pop-up page, that it does these form settings. So you're basically doing a form alter at this point, adding your own in there. So I do some CIS connector magic to build the registry of things that can be connected to, and then present those as the bucket that you want to connect to. If you do default value and then you set this, it's nice, and you always have scope of this, which is the current view you're working on. So this display get option and then CIS bucket. So again, it'll go back to the default, which in this case is none whenever we start using the view. But if you update the setting after the fact, I'll let you set it there. CIS instance is then just the checkbox we have, and I have in the comments here a way that you can see what that does. It's whether or not to rewrite the request to go to a specific implementation of a service or if it's a standalone service. Next, you do a submit handler. So similar to the form API, once it's been submitted, capture these options and set them. Then you have this summary, which is what gets presented on that page at the highest level. So CI's connector, and it says CLE there because that's the option that was set. The way it does that is that we grab the bucket here, and category is other, and title is CI's connector, which is why I put it there. You can have a description for that field, and then the value to display. So this is the value that's been selected. So at first it says none because that's the default, and now because I've set a bucket of CLE, it puts that there. Then you see I have the ability to modify the query. So the whole time I'm making sure I wrap this in view base table XML. So it only affects views XML backend based queries. And then we have the options that we pull from our display handler options currently, and then we add it to the query options. What that does is so that then when you use something like views post build, you basically get access to the CIS bucket and CIS instance options in your query here. So I can take those into account, and again, you'll see if these are all defined, so let's say they are, then utilize the bucket that was selected to get the settings, set a base path. So if it's instance, then we don't want to use the current base path. If it is instance, we want to use the current base path, otherwise just use a backslash. And then address, we have CIS connector format address, which then builds the address and appends the previous XML file settings. So what the heck does that all mean? Right now, I have this as it's using views XML backend as its display type. So if I go into query, the way this normally works, you write out a query, you do it to a full XML file, and you give it a row, and it walks the, using XPath arguments, it walks the document and pulls it out into records that views is aware of. Pretty cool module, but I don't know what bucket I'm connecting to, right? I don't want to write in a full address. It's an authenticated bind. I don't want to give up those credentialed information in this because it'll be a feature that gets exported. So what I do is I just write XML file as everything after the service I'm connecting to. And then in CIS connector, I click this, you'll see I can select which system to connect to. So these are the systems that we are aware of in our little CIS network here. You write which one you want to connect to, and then if it's an instance or not. So for CIS, if you care, online.ame.pcr.edu is a single instance, so it's not a slash the name of this course, in this case BTO Pro. Whereas something like collaborative learning environment, the Elms version, which we call Studio, this doesn't connect to just that address, it actually connects to /BTO Pro. So this allows me to differentiate between the two. When I apply it using those views files, so basically it runs through this post build, notices that I've set these settings, and then rewrites the query so it points to the right location. This can then be exported as a feature, and it actually is. I've added it as a feature in CLE, so CIS service connecting to CLE. So now I have a generic view that generically connects to whatever bucket you, as the end developer, have defined. This is huge for what I'm going to be doing in the future because I can query other systems via views and present the results visually and modify the way those queries are done just through the views UI, which would make it a lot faster. So if I wanted to ask the CIS system, how many courses are in it currently, I could write a views query through the views at UI, query that, and then export it. And it doesn't have any of my connection settings in it. It's just the way that the language is drafted downstream. So once you set up your own system and you put in those settings, it'll just work.